The following program is made possible by the generous sponsorship of Crescent Bank. From the campus of Coastal Carolina University, the Center for Military and Veteran Studies is pleased to present Military Memoirs. Hello and welcome to Military Memoirs, sponsored by the Center for Military and Veteran Studies at Coastal Carolina University. I'm Rod Gregg, and our guest on the program today is Mr. John Christian Gilmour of Myrtle Beach in Kearney, New Jersey, who was a corporal in World War II in the European theater with the 771st Tank Destroyer Battalion. Mr. Gilmour has an incredible story to share with us, including a harrowing moment in March of 1944 when he was captured by German forces and found himself as a hostage and a target riding on the front of a German Tiger tank. It's a pleasure to have you here, sir, today.
Thank you.
Let's back up a moment. You grew up in New Jersey,
right,
in the 1920s, in Kearney.
Kearney.
Now, what was that like? Can you tell us about your family?
Well, it was a family of 5, and today there's just 3 of us, and my brother and my sister still live in Kearney. And Kearney was a Scotch-Irish town, and we had a lot of good memories still. And one in particular, especially the way things are going, that like a centennial of the Civil War, Kearney had quite a bit to do in that as far as the history goes. We had, well, first General Phil Kearney, which Kearney is named after, and also they had a old soldiers' home, and it covered about 3 city blocks and had a long causeway. And I guess about 5 years old. My brother was a Civil War buff, and he'd brought us down there, and I got to shake hands with these guys. Still remember it. They had both the blue and the gray.
So let me see if I understand this, if I interrupt you just a second. Now, you were born January 2nd, 1922.
Right.
1922. So there were still Civil War veterans
There
around in
definitely
those
was,
days.
yes,
You
yes.
obviously loved growing up in Kearney.
Yeah.
But in Kearney, there was a soldiers' home of Civil War veterans, you're
Yes.
telling me, and you and your brother would go down there and talk to these
Yeah,
Civil
right,
War veterans. Now, how did that impact you?
Well, we had a book, a large book that had a lot of black and white pictures and sketches of the Civil War, and that's how my brother-in-law got interested in it. And you know, typical kid, you know, whether it was the Civil War or World War I, you were interested in it, you know, because I used to play with his toys. And when I went down there, it was so nice because, first of all, we would get to see these guys. They'd be walking along and with canes, you know. I mean, I guess most of them back then they were in their 80s and 90s, but they're still able to move around and talk to us. And I don't remember too much about what they said, but I just remember, you know, them smiling at us. You know, that they were in a uniform and typical little boy, you know.
Northerners
that's nice.
and Southerners.
Yeah.
Well, now, as a kid in the 1920s, meeting these Civil War veterans, did you ever imagine that you were going to be a soldier one day?
Oh, of course not.
Well, you went to school in Kearney.
Yes.
Okay.
I went, yes.
And then you were married and started your own family.
Right.
And you told me earlier that you were married to June Rupp of Long Island.
That's correct.
And then you were drafted for World War II.
Yeah, well, I tried to enlist in it. And they had, at the very beginning, when the war broke out, there was a height requirement. I mean, why, I don't know, but anyway, because the first thing I wanted to do was get in the Air Force. No. And then the Coast Guard, they weren't hiring. They weren't taking any veteran, anybody. And then the Navy. The Navy took me through the whole bit, the written, the physical, and everything. And I stood there with my clothes and my arm. And the guy said, "Gee, I'm sorry." He says, "But you don't meet the height requirement." Well, it couldn't have been more than a few weeks after that, I got my A1.
So you got drafted. So they said you're not
Drafted.
tall enough, but they drafted
Oh,
you.
they drafted me. That was no problem.
Well, let me ask you this. Why, and this is so typical of your generation, I think, but here you are in the middle of a war, and you're going from one service branch to another trying to get into it.
Yeah.
Now, explain what you're thinking was. What motivated you?
I have no idea.
Well, was
That's
that
what
typical?
I couldn't understand. I figured the first one I went down to, they would accept me, but they did not.
But why did you feel compelled to go join the American service in the middle of a war?
Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor, my buddy and I, and a little town like that, when we got the news, when it's a Sunday afternoon, that nobody slept in town for the whole night, and the next day everybody was out. And then they're all heading for the recruiting office. That was like a standard procedure.
And you, in that way, were very typical of the young men in your generation.
Certainly, yeah.
You learned of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor,
Right.
and so your first reation was to go get in uniform and fight back.
Right.
Well, you were drafted. You told me you went to Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And did your basic training at Camp Hood in Texas, and then found yourself undergoing more training in Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia. And then you were shipped overseas, but not to the Pacific to fight the Japanese, but you were shipped out in November of 1943 to England.
Right.
And you were then with the 771st Tank Destroyer Battalion.
That's right.
And tell me, what's a tank destroyer, and what was your job in that battalion?
Well, when I first, like I said, down A.P. Hill, I was in the part of the tank crew for just about a month due to the fact that the tank crew had gone to Fort Meade for extra training. And when he came back, they were right back in their destroyer, and I was out. So they put me in the headquarters company and the supply area.
So you found yourself a corporal eventually, working in this tank destroyer battalion, and your job was to keep these armored vehicles going with fuel and ammo. And you brought in a model here that we'll look at in a moment. But this is like very similar to a Sherman tank, the famous American tank of World War II.
It's got the same chassis.
Got the same Sherman chassis,
Yeah.
but instead of a closed turret, it actually has an open turret.
That's correct.
And for most of the war, it had a 75 millimeter
Right.
cannon on it,
Yes.
and a machine gun in the back, a 50 caliber, I think,
caliber,
right?
right.
So, what was the great strength of this weapon?
It wasn't in the armor, it didn't have the thick armor, but it had the maneuverability, and as the guys used to think, was the fact that it was a hit and run. That was the way that was designed to do, and that's why it had the light armor. But the destroyer itself was able to maneuver. It had a little better maneuverability than the Sherman.
So, in essence, this basically was an open turret fast tank.
It was a hit and run.
Hit and run,
That's
and
right.
And with a 75 millimeter gun, it was effective in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Except when facing German Tiger tanks, which had heavy armor,
Well,
and that 75 was hard to penetrate.
Yes, even the Panther, which was another version, German version, it wasn't always effective depending on you used to get ricochets. You know, you had to get a flank shot, and most of the time, if you could disable the tank, then you know, then you had a chance of.
So in
knocking
combat,
it
then
out.
you were often aiming it at the treads, at
Yeah,
the
yeah,
wheels, so to
yeah.
speak, to knock it out that way, because the German
Yes.
armor was so good, so
But
thick.
couldn't penetrate the German armor. Didn't have the weapon for it until later when they had the 90 millimeter naval gun on the M36. It was a modified version.
With armor-piercing rounds, and that
Yeah,
would
right.
do it. Now, you found yourself training troops at Salton Sands
coming in,
in
yes.
Great Britain. You got a commendation for doing that, for
Yes.
training these troops. And then you went into France in a month after D-Day in Omaha Beach, and then across France in the Normandy campaign, and found yourself one day in Germany about to supply a tank destroyer, when instead you're face to face with a German Tiger tank and infantry troops who had the drop on you, and you became their prisoner in an extraordinary story. And we're going to talk about that when we come back in just a moment.
They're all around us. They're the men and women who served in our nation's armed forces. In good times and bad, they've been willing to stand in harm's way to preserve, protect, and defend the legacy of freedom we enjoy as Americans. All of them gave some, and some of them gave all. We owe them a lot. So the next time you see an American veteran, say thank you for all of us.
Welcome back to Military Memoirs, sponsored by the Center for Military and Veteran Studies at Coastal Carolina University. We're talking today to John Christian Gilmour, Myrtle Beach and Kearney, New Jersey, who was in World War II in the European theater, served with the 771st Tank Destroyer Battalion, and in March of 1944, as Americans were pressing across Germany, you were in a truck doing your job, supplying these tank destroyers, and then all of a sudden you found yourself face to face with the enemy.
That's correct.
How did that happen?
Well, when we were up, had dropped off our gas and ammo. What originally, you know, then you set up your camouflage and everything like that, and then we'll hopefully go back the same way. But we got information from the company. I believe it was a bigger company, I'm not sure now. But they said that the way we came, a lot of stuff is coming in and going out, you know, so that we take a different route.
So the lines were mixed up, German and American
so,
units crossing each other.
We had to, and the map I have, we got a half a map, so to speak. And so we just had to take a guess, getting a route back. And this took us a little bit up into the mountain area. It was outside of Hanover.
So you were in Germany, and you're in between the lines, and that's where the Americans and Germans were mixing it up.
Yeah,
and so
I guess it was.
you could have been,
yeah.
They were on your side, you were on their side, so to speak, and you just supplied a unit. So you're coming back, and your gasoline was empty. You didn't have any ammo, and you said you came out of the woods, and what did you see?
Well, we made a turn, a sharp turn, and there was this tiger. Apparently, you know, they had their patrol out. They always do. You have to be ahead of the tanks to know what's going on up ahead, you know.
So this was a German tank.
German, yeah. So they probably heard us and prepared them for whatever. They didn't know exactly what was coming around there, you know. And then when it came around, the fact, I guess, they realized that maybe the major in charge or whoever it was realized that this could be gasoline for us, you know, gas. So they decided when we made the turn, they just put the old 88 down on us, and we came to a stop. And
So,
they didn't
and this
fire.
is a model you brought in
Yeah,
of
that's a small
a German Tiger tank. So you came out of the woods around the curve in your truck, you and one other soldier.
Yeah,
In your truck, and you found yourself face to face with this German tank
So we
supported
came to a
by
top.
infantry.
Yeah.
And the reason they didn't fire on you because they thought you had fuel and they wanted it.
Certainly.
So they made you prisoners right away?
They did, yes.
And what did they do to you?
Well, the first thing they do is interrogate you like anything else, and and they wanted to know where our outfit was at the time. They could see on it was marked 771. They knew we were a tank destroyer by the patch. I mean, it wasn't stupid. And they decided that the major was interrogating both my buddy and I. And then they put him on a truck. They didn't talk to him very much, but for some reason, I don't know, maybe they figured this little guy, we could get what we wanted out of him. But anyway,
But they didn't.
They didn't. I gave him the American serial number, and he was teed off. And the reason he was teed off is that these guys were emptying supposedly they thought it was full tanks of gas. And when he found out they weren't, he hit the roof.
So the German officer was angry that
he was a major.
these gas cans that they found on your truck were empty and they couldn't get gas.
They threw them all over, right down to the last one.
So when you wouldn't give them the information about your unit that they wanted, what did they do to you?
No, they just, they didn't physically like beat us or anything like that. No, they just, not to push you. And right away they knew what they wanted to do, I guess. And so they took, Graffio was my buddy. They put him in the truck with the, they had, I guess, about maybe 50 or 60 infantry. And then they split it up between the two trucks, our truck. They took our truck. And then they talked to me, and like I say, I wouldn't give them the information. And he said, and in German, whatever it was, he motioned, and the guy pushed, he could climb up on the truck, on the tank, and had me straddle the tank.
So you were actually riding on the front of the German tank.
I was riding on the barrel.
You were sitting on the barrel of
yes.
the cannon.
Yeah, just right here, just at where it comes out of the.
And the point of that was that you were going to be a hostage and a target.
Yeah.
So if they ran into American troops, here's an American soldier sitting on the cannon of their tank. Now, what were your feelings when you realized that you were up there?
I was a little, needless to say, I had some second, third, and fourth thoughts. But there's nothing I could do about it.
Right. Did you think at that moment, am
I
I going to see my wife? Am I going to, have my family, my kids, my future?
1,000 things run through your mind. 1,000 things.
All right. So they had you on the front of the tank. So then they set out again, trying to find their way back into German lines.
Right. And they drove from. That was, I guess, about mid-afternoon when they caught us, and we rode till we came to a place they bivouacked first. It was in a little clearing, or not a clearing, but a little coverage from the forest. And then the next day, that's when they ran into, I guess it was American patrol, because I could see them from a distance. I could see I recognized it was a T2, which is a tank retriever, and it was towing a Sherman.
So you could see these American troops.
Yes.
How far away were they?
I was about a half mile.
So for a half a mile in front of you, you saw American troops, and they were towing a disabled tank.
They were down to the left in a lower road.
Right. And you were back on the cannon of this German tank.
Yes.
So did they open fire on the Americans?
Right away.
Now what did you do? You're on the cannon.
Well, what gave me a little a second or two was the fact that the road where they were on down in the ravine was off to the left, so they had to move the gun. So as soon as they started moving the gun, I was prepared to go.
So you knew they were going to open fire.
I knew they were going to, certainly.
So you jumped off the tank?
Yeah, and they fired 2 rounds, and they just destroyed everything there. Then they sent infantry down to reconnoiter, and the infantry come back with 2 that made it.
So they had 4 prisoners
So
then,
then
counting
we had,
yourself.
yeah, 4 of us.
Well, did you go back? They put you back on the tank?
Oh, definitely, right back on there, because I figured to go into anything else, you know, I'm sure that these, well, the kid I was talking to that they captured, he said that they thought they saw something, you know, and one of the sergeants, he said, had binoculars, so maybe that's when I was thinking to myself later when I thought about it, maybe the fact that this guy, if he had the binoculars and he saw me, he figured it's okay, you know?
Which is what the Germans wanted.
That's what
they
they
wanted
wanted.
somebody to pause
I was
because
a-
they saw an American hostage on the tank.
I was a decoy.
So then so you were with them, you told me, for 4 days.
Yes.
But then a point came where you began to think that maybe they were going to take you all out in the woods and shoot you.
I had no idea. Well, we thought a lot of things went through our mind, but as I told you before, this German lieutenant from the Luftwaffe that was with them, he spoke English, broken English, but quite well, you know. And he said, "I doubt that they're going to let you go, because you'll give our position away, you know, even though they're in a certain area, it could be." So that's when we started really thinking.
So they would stop at night and they give you a little something to eat.
And we were at this villa, and they in this wooden room, I guess with a living room or something. So the 4 of us got talking. So we had to put things together, what we're going to do. And we said that if it came to that, we're going to have to make a break for it.
So there was a German major in command of this tank and
Yes.
these 50 infantry troops. But there was also a German Air Force lieutenant,
Yeah.
a Luftwaffe,
Yeah.
and the Luftwaffe tended to be more sensitive to American
Yeah,
POWs
yeah.
because so many of their people were caught as
Yeah.
they bailed out of their aircraft. So he's talking to you a bit.
He was. See, the tank crew, they were taunting me, digging me all the time, you know. They spoke not too well, but I could understand what they were saying.
And what were they telling
Yeah.
you?
You know, we like one said, we killed a lot of Americans, you know, like bragging.
right.
And that's what they were doing, bragging.
right.
Yeah,
Kind of tormenting. And the major in command wasn't too
Yeah.
happy with the Luftwaffe officer talking to you.
Oh no. He soon as he got even anywhere near me, he'd call him over in German, you know, real, and he would jump to it.
What did you think at that time? Do you think you were going to be able to get out of that alive?
I actually we didn't until that one point. We thought there was a chance, maybe somewhere along the line, that we can make a break. That's what we were talking about. That's what the first thing you do, is think of some way you can
Right.
escape. But
So you thought you were going to be shot, taken
Yes.
to the woods and shot, but after 4 days, as you were traveling, they got into a firefight with, you thought, Americans with someone. Now what happened then?
they didn't get into a firefight, but like I said, these 2 guys dropped and fired into the woods.
These 2 German soldiers.
Yes, and that's when we took off.
So they opened fire in the woods, you broke
Yeah,
free,
Yeah.
and you thought they were going to fire on you, but they didn't turn.
No,
Did you think they were
didn't.
going to
That-
pursue
That's
you?
right. We were on this road, and we traveled all night on that. Walked all night, rested for a little once in a while, till we get down to this town, and then we were deciding, what are we going to do? Are we going to go through? It could be still in the Germans' hands. you know?
Because you're in Germany.
Yeah, we heard a sound I'll never forget. The bolt on a rifle.
The bolt action on a rifle.
Bolt action on a rifle, and the guy asked for the password. Well, I didn't know what. Said each day you got a different password, you know. So all I said was, Joe DiMaggio. That had been one. Joe DiMaggio. I said Joe Louis. I don't know what the hell I said. And then they asked. When he talked, I knew it was American. Then all of us started talking, and then they took us over to the officer in charge. I saw the signs, Hanover, So that's why I can figure. That's why I figured that's where I was, but it was in the vicinity anyway. So we got on the truck, and we were driving for maybe a half hour or so, and then we came to the Audubon, and there was a lot of action on the Audubon. It was all hours, trucks going and coming.
That was a German superhighway.
So that we had taken over that area. So we get out onto the Audubon and going along, and that was a matter of about 15 minutes, I guess, and it wasn't even that. And this truck going by us, and I see our marking, 771 headquarters.
From your battalion?
From my battalion. And I banged on the roof, and I hung over, and I told the guy, so he caught up with him, they got him to pull over. I jumped out, Raphael and I jumped out, and we jumped in the truck, and it was Lou Grom, I'll never forget. Lou Grom, he was our mess sergeant. He says, Gilmour, where the hell have you been? You know?
And you said you'd never believe it, right?
No. And so we went with them, and then they turned off the Audubon and went for, maybe another 20 minutes, half hour, and then they pulled into an area, and then all our trucks and everything there.
You stayed with the 771st Tank Destroyer Battalion through the end of the war, and you were there in Germany at the end of the war in Europe at VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. And you remember that? You were you went to the Elbe River, which was where the Russians had come in.
They stopped,
And what happened on VE Day? You found yourself with some Russian soldiers.
Yeah, we had just a brief one with them. In other words, there was only a few of them. I don't know. They were with an officer. They were pretty cool. Anytime there was about 3 or 4 or 5 of them, an officer would scoot over to them. To make sure that they wasn't saying anything they're not supposed to.
Well, the Russians were allies, so you had a moment of celebration there.
Yeah, right.
And then you finished the war in Austria in occupation duty.
Yes, right.
When you look back at it now, and you're almost 90,
right.
When you look back at your time in World War II, what does that mean to you?
It feels good to know that you did your job. And down here, I mean, after the war, I was living up home and everything like that, and we forgot, nobody talked about it. And then I believe it was Tom Brogar that really started the guys.
Greatest Generation.
The Greatest Generation, that book. I have that book, I read it. And he got the guys going, and then they all started talking about it. And even like I told you with this Ghost Army, they were allowed to talk about it. They were held in secrecy for it all that time.
Well, when you look back at World War II, knowing that you were a part of something that big.
I feel good about it, certainly. I mean, this is our country, and we did what we had to do. But one thing I remember, like I've been down here, I've been interviewed a few times with, the people stop and talk to you. And one thing I always correct them on, they say, thank you for being a hero. And I tell them, no way are we a hero. The only hero are the guys that never came back. That is it.
Well, that's what so many of you veterans say, but I have to tell you that you're certainly a hero to many of us. Well, you deserve all of our thanks. And after, at the end of World War II, you came home to your wife, June.
Right.
You had 3 children,
right.
Junie, Dennis, and Sharon.
Yeah, Dennis I had before I went overseas. And I got home, he was a little over 3 years old. Okay.
Dennis, Junie, and Sharon were your children.
Right.
You spent 40 years working with Trans World Airlines, TWA, in tech services, and you retired to Myrtle Beach In the 1990s,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, we want to thank you for your service. We want to thank you for what you've done for all of us Americans. We want to thank you for being on this program. It's an honor to have you here.
Yeah.
We want to thank you, too, for joining us for Military Memoirs.